Okay guys, so in this video we're going to be looking at simplifying surds. Before I begin with that, I thought I'd actually explain what a surd is. So I'll give you a few examples first. So surds can be stuff like root 2, root 5, root 15, root 11, and as you can see they all have a little square root sign. But what makes it different from things like root 4 and root 9 and root 25, for instance, is that these numbers here are what we call irrational. And what that means is that we can't make them be a nice little number. We can't simply square root it like these ones. So the square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 gives me 4. Square root of 9 is 3, because 3 times 3 is 9. And the square root of 25 is 5, because 5 times 5 gives me 25. So these numbers in my lime green here, these are what we call rational numbers, because it comes out really nice and straightforward. However, these ones up here, they don't come out so nice, and they are stuck under the square root sign unless we have a calculator. But we can make some of these surds a little bit nicer to work with non-calculator, and that is where this idea of simplifying surds comes in. So why don't we start taking a look at a few questions. So what I have here is 4 examples. Now to start off with, I'm going to do a really basic method. It's not the quickest method in the world, but it is a straightforward method that you can follow and just work through these questions. Then after this, I've got 4 more questions, and I'll look at showing you ways that you can do this a little bit quicker once you're a little bit more confident with the idea of surds. And what's going to help us simplify these are our squared numbers. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to write out a little list of all my square numbers, and that is just going to be a little guide for me. So when I am simplifying these questions, I'm not having to think to myself, is this number a square number? So I'm just going to work through. So 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9. Oh, I was about to jump to 5 squared there. 4 squared is 16. 5 squared is 25. 6 squared is 36. 7 squared, 49. 8 squared is not 84, 64. 9 squared is 81. And 10 squared is 100. And very rarely do you need a squared number bigger than that. So here's a list of our squared numbers, and I'm just going to highlight specifically the squared number in all of these. So we are going to use these to try and help us simplify the surds, and what we need to identify is the highest square number that can divide into these numbers under the square roots. So a really straightforward way to go about this question is, in order to identify the highest square number, we want to look to see the smallest numbers that can divide into these. So we're going to skip over 1 because that's not going to change anything with this number. But first we're going to look at 12 divided by 2. So 12 divided by 2 is 6. And then what I want to do is I want to look at my square numbers here and see if I can spot 6. 6 is not there, so that is not going to work. So I'll give it a little cross. Then I go up by 1, so I look at 12 divided by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then it is a square number, so that is going to work. So I give that a little tick. So I'm going to be using this 3 and this 4. So my root 12, and I'm just going to write out root 12 again, is now going to be 4 times 3. So I use those 2 little bits that I highlighted there. And I always prefer having the square number at the front. Now what I can do with a surd is that I can split it up. When it's multiplied, I can just break it up into 2 little bits like this. Because think, when I have things right next to each other, and there's no symbol, that means they are still being multiplied. So there's still a multiplication going on there. And now the square root of 4 is 2. So my final answer is 2 root 3, because I can't do anything with that 3. Okay, let's look at another question then. So here I've got 98. So again, I'm going to start small. I'm going to think, right, what is 98 divided by 2 going to be? So I can set up a little division to help me with this. 2 goes into 9 4 times with a remainder of 1. 2 goes into 18 9 times. So 98 divided by 2 is 49. So I look at my list and I see if I can spot 49. Yep, there it is. 49 is going to work. So I'll give that a little tick. And so those are the numbers which I'm going to use, that 2 and that 49. So I'm going to have my root 98 is going to become 49 times 2. And again, I can split it up. So it becomes root 49 root 2. And then the square root of 49 is 7 root 2. Okay. Let's go on to the next example then. So I've got root 20. So I'm going to do the same thing as before. So, I wrote 98 again there. 20 divided by 2 is 10. I look at my list, 10 is nowhere to be seen, so that's not going to work. Then 20 divided by 3. Well, I can't divide 20 by 3, so that's definitely not going to work because all my square numbers are whole numbers. I skip 4, and actually I'm going to write this in green here and just so you can see, I'm going to skip this. The reason why is because that 4 is one of my square numbers, and so it can work sometimes, but you might risk not identifying the highest square number if you divide by a square number. So always skip your square numbers when you come across them. So now I'm going to look at 20 divided by 5, and that does give me 4, and so therefore that is going to work. So I've now got my root 20. Root 20 can be made by doing root 4 times 5. Break apart that surd to have root 4, root 5. And then the square root of 4 is 2. And that root 5 just stays the same. Okay, one more to look at. And then we'll look at some quicker ways to quickly get towards that end answer. So I've got 125. Dividing it by 2 is going to give me a decimal, so that's not going to work. 125, if I divide it by 3, and if I also do a little division thing, I would find that that would give me a decimal, so that's not going to work. I skip dividing it by 4. Then 125 divided by 5 gives me 25. That is in my list, so that is going to work. So I'm going to have root 25 times 5. So that's going to be the same as root 25, root 5. Square root of 25 is 5. Root 5. So this is my sort of foolproof method on simplifying fractions. And the main thing is once we've identified that tick, you're using the numbers you found here. And always make sure you do skip square numbers when you come across them. But obviously this does have its limitations. If we were dealing with a bigger number, we might have to find ourselves doing this division a lot of times. So now we're going to look at a couple of ways to just make this a little quicker on the odd occasion. So I've already written out my square numbers up top, and what we're going to do is we're going to work through these and we're going to highlight some ways to try and help us work through these a little quicker. So this first one, I've got root 700. Now, the thing I would instantly clock is the fact that it is 700. And because it's 700, I can definitely divide it by 100, which is one of my square numbers. And in fact, that is exactly what we're going to do. Because if you think about it, 700, if we divided that by 7, that gives us 100. And so that's going to work. And that's going to save us from having to work through that method multiple times like we were just doing. And so this is now just going to be 100 times 7, which is just going to be root 100, root 7, square root of 100 is 10. So 10 root 7 is my final answer there. Okay, so the next one. So I'm looking at that, I'm going, right, I've got 640. And this 6 and 4 part, instantly when I look at that, I will suddenly clock to me that I've got 64 in one of my, in my list for my square numbers. And so to get to that, all I need to do is divide 640 by 10. And so that is what I'm going to work with. So I'm now going to have 64 times 10, which is going to equal root 64, root 10. And the square root of 64 is 8. So I'm going to have 8 root 10. Okay, so our next one, I've got root 44. So another way you can go about this is that you can think, right, to start off with, it is definitely going to be a square number that is less than 44. So right here in the line, somewhere here, that is 44. And 44 divided by 2 is going to be 22. So that means it definitely is going to be less than 22. So all I've got to work with is 4, 9 and 6. And the clue is kind of in the number 44. I can definitely divide that by 4. And in fact, if I divided 44 by 11, that gives me 4. And that is going to work. So I'm now going to have 4 times 11, which is equal to root 4, root 11, which is going to be 2 root 11. Now, this last example, this is in the what if section that you do simplify it, but you don't simplify it fully. You haven't identified the highest square number that can go into it. And so that's what I'm going to show in this next example. So to start off with, I've got 80. Now, a lot of people are pretty quick at clocking that if we were to divide 80 by 20, that gives us 4. Divide 80 by 4, that gives us 20. And so a lot of people I see are quick at doing this little bit. So to go, right, 4 times 20, that's going to work. And I can split that up. So I've got root 4, root 20. And then I get to the stage here where they've got 2 root 20. And they think, right, I'm done. And they move on. However, just be aware, sometimes double check to see, can we simplify this surd here that little bit more? And we can in this case. And in fact, we actually simplified root 20 in the previous set. So the first thing we need to remember is, again, with the 2 and the root 20, they're right next to each other. So that means they are being multiplied together. So I'm actually going to just draw that in now. And as we found previously on our previous little bit of questions, root 20, so our root 20 there is the same as 2 root 5. So you would go through the motions of simplifying it. And so, I'll write out all of the steps here again. So we would have gone, right, 4 times 5. So I've got 2 times root 4 root 5. So it's going to be 2 times Square root of 4 is 2. Root 5. And then all I need to do is just this little multiplication here with the numbers that are outside of the square root. And I'm going to go into a few more examples on this in the next video. So that is the introduction to simplifying surds. They're a little weird, but this method here is pretty foolproof. If you just follow those steps really nice and slowly, you should happily get on with these questions. But once you get a little more confident, see if you can sort of jump ahead. See if you can identify what the highest square number is going to be. Let me know if there are any issues, and good luck with the work.